Welcome to Moonest, where stories come and go like the tides. I'm grateful you've come to rest with us. Tonight, we'll drift together into a peaceful tale that moves as gently as the waves. Let your thoughts soften, and stay with us. What's coming next is full of quiet magic. There existed a place beyond the winding paths of ordinary travelers, a hidden valley where twilight never faded. Its skies were painted with hues of lavender and amber, stretching far into the horizon, untouched by the passage of time. The sun lingered just above the hills, casting soft shadows that danced gently upon the cobbled paths. It was a place known only in whispered tales, the Garden of Eternal Dusk, where day and night touched fingertips but never parted. At the heart of this valley stood a garden, lush and vibrant, where flowers bloomed with a glow of their own. Roses of deep plum, lilies brushed with silver, and ivy that shimmered faintly with each breath of wind. Lantern vines curled up trellises, their blossoms glowing like captured starlight. The air hummed with the murmur of distant streams and the soft rustling of leaves, as if the earth itself whispered in its sleep. In this tranquil world, there lived an old caretaker named Thaddeus. His hair was silver, swept back and tied with a thin ribbon of indigo cloth. His hands were weathered but gentle, tending to each petal and leaf with the care of a storyteller turning the pages of a fragile book. He moved through the paths with a slow, deliberate grace, carrying a bronze watering can that shimmered with flecks of light. He whispered to the plants as he passed, brushing his fingertips along petals and vines. They seemed to respond with soft sighs, leaning ever so slightly toward him as if they, too, understood his whispers. Thaddeus lived alone in a small stone cottage nestled among the weeping willows. Its roof was thick with moss, and ivy crept up the walls like delicate fingers. He would sit upon his wooden porch each evening, a cup of lavender tea steaming gently in his hands, watching the twilight glow stretch out before him. He never seemed to age, just as the garden never withered. Time flowed differently here, suspended in that eternal hush between day and night. The days in the valley passed with a rhythm all their own, unhurried and hushed. Thaddeus wandered the garden paths, his footsteps soft upon the mossy stones. He spoke to the magnolia trees in low whispers and hummed to the lantern vines as he trimmed their delicate blossoms. In return, the flowers bloomed brighter, and the leaves shivered gently, as if touched by an unseen breeze. But one evening, as the twilight deepened to its softest shade of violet, Thaddeus noticed something unusual, a figure standing at the edge of the garden path. Silhouetted against the amber sky, the figure did not move, merely watched with a stillness that stirred something deep within the caretaker's heart. Thaddeus paused, his hands still dusted with soil, and gazed back, the silence stretching between them like a fragile thread. The figure stepped forward, the soft crunch of petals beneath their feet breaking the stillness. As they approached, the light caught strands of their hair, reflecting hues of copper and gold. They wore a cloak of midnight blue, clasped at the throat with a silver brooch shaped like a crescent moon. Thaddeus straightened, brushing the soil from his hands. His voice, when he spoke, was gentle and steady. "You have come far," he said softly, his eyes never leaving theirs. The stranger nodded, their gaze sweeping over the garden as if seeing it for the first time. "I have been searching for this place," they replied, their voice low and edged with the softness of distant lands. The stories said it was only a myth. Thaddeus smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Most things worth finding are," he murmured, stepping aside and gesturing to the garden. "Welcome to the Garden of Eternal Dusk." Thaddeus led the stranger through winding paths that glowed softly beneath the eternal dusk. The cobblestones were edged with moss, and tiny flowers peeked from the cracks, their petals shimmering with hues of lavender and gold. The air was thick with the scent of wild jasmine and honeysuckle, carrying with it the distant murmur of streams that wound lazily through the garden's heart. The stranger moved slowly, their fingertips grazing the petals of lantern vines that dangled from twisted arches. "It feels like a dream," they murmured, eyes wide with wonder. Thaddeus only smiled, his hands clasped behind his back as he walked with the practiced ease of someone who had known these paths for lifetimes. "Dreams often find their way here," he replied gently. "They drift on the twilight breeze and settle among the leaves. If you listen closely, you might hear them whisper." The stranger paused, tilting their head as if to catch the sound. A breeze stirred, and the branches of the weeping willows rustled softly, their leaves brushing the surface of the shallow pools beneath them. It was a gentle, rhythmic sound, like a lullaby sung from the lips of forgotten things. "Do you tend to this place alone?" the stranger asked, their voice carrying a note of disbelief. Thaddeus nodded, his eyes softening. "The garden knows me," he replied simply. "It blooms and grows with the light of dusk, and I am its keeper." He paused, turning to face the stranger fully. "But you are the first visitor I have had in many, many years." The stranger's gaze dropped to the stones beneath their feet. "I found this place by accident, or perhaps not," they whispered, almost to themselves. Thaddeus watched them carefully, the lines around his eyes crinkling with curiosity. "Accidents are sometimes the universe speaking softly," he said, his voice gentle. "And you are here now, which means you were meant to be." The stranger's eyes flickered with something unspoken, a memory perhaps, and they looked back up at him, their gaze steady. "Then let me walk with you," they said softly, and Thaddeus nodded, extending a hand forward. "Come then. The paths are waiting." They walked in silence, the soft crunch of petals underfoot the only sound that threaded through the garden's stillness. Thaddeus led the way, his steps deliberate, his gaze thoughtful. The stranger followed just behind, their eyes tracing the tendrils of ivy that crept along the stone walls and the flowering vines that curled around wooden arches. Here and there, blossoms drifted from the branches of willow trees, floating gently to the ground like fragments of dreams. The path curved gently, leading them to a grove where pale flowers bloomed in perfect circles, their petals shimmering with the faintest hint of light. Thaddeus paused, kneeling beside one of the blossoms, his fingers brushing its petals with care. "They are called whispering bells," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you listen closely, you can hear their song." The stranger knelt beside him, their cloak pooling around them in folds of midnight blue. They leaned in, tilting their head toward the flower's delicate petals. At first, there was only silence, the gentle hum of the garden's breath and the whisper of wind through the leaves. But then, faint and melodic, came a sound so soft it was almost imagined, a gentle sigh, like the echo of distant bells swaying in the twilight breeze. The stranger gasped, pulling back slightly, eyes wide with wonder. "They sing," they whispered, voice hushed with awe. Thaddeus nodded, a smile playing at his lips. "They remember every footstep, every word spoken beneath their branches," he explained. "The garden listens, always." They lingered there, surrounded by the soft glow of the whispering bells, listening to the gentle murmurs of petals that seemed to sway in rhythm with the twilight breeze. For a long while, neither of them spoke, as if the garden itself had lulled them into silence. It was a silence that felt like a pause between breaths, soft, eternal, and full of whispered secrets. Thaddeus rose from the grove of whispering bells, brushing the soil from his hands with a practiced sweep. The stranger followed, their gaze lingering on the delicate flowers that swayed gently, as if singing their secrets to the wind. "There is more to see," Thaddeus said softly, his voice carrying the warmth of familiarity. He led the way down a narrow path, half hidden beneath trailing vines of ivy that wound around ancient stone arches. The arches were carved with symbols that the stranger could not decipher, loops and spirals that twisted around the stone like ivy itself, frozen in time. "What are these?" they asked, running their fingertips over the cool surface. Thaddeus paused, his gaze following theirs. "Markers," he replied. "Remnants of those who wandered here long ago. The garden remembers them, just as it remembers you now." The stranger's hand lingered on the stone, tracing the curves of the symbols with a kind of reverence. "And they left this?" they asked, their voice hushed. Thaddeus nodded, a soft smile playing at his lips. "They left their stories, their whispers, their dreams." His hand reached out to brush aside a curtain of ivy, revealing a hidden alcove where lantern vines blossomed in soft clusters of light. The path led onward, winding between willows and clusters of wild lavender that scented the air with a gentle sweetness. Petals drifted from overhead, catching the light as they fell, suspended for a moment before settling silently upon the moss-covered stones. The stranger walked with deliberate steps, their eyes drinking in the scenery as if committing every detail to memory. Finally, the path opened into a wide clearing, where a fountain of smooth marble stood at its center, water trickling softly from its tears. Lilies floated upon its surface, their petals glimmering like fragments of moonlight. Thaddeus paused, gesturing with an open hand. "The fountain of stillness," he said quietly. "A place for reflection, and for remembering." The stranger stepped forward, eyes fixed upon the water's surface, where tiny ripples spread like whispered secrets. The stranger knelt beside the fountain, their cloak pooling at their feet in folds of midnight blue. The water was impossibly clear, its surface reflecting the twilight sky as if it were made of glass. Lilies drifted lazily, their petals shimmering with hues of violet and silver, catching the light in a way that seemed almost deliberate. "It's beautiful," the stranger murmured, their fingers hovering just above the surface. Thaddeus stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. "The fountain is old," he said, his voice low and steady. "Older than even I can remember. It holds the memories of those who have walked this garden, echoes of their thoughts, their dreams." He gestured toward the lilies that floated in perfect circles. "Each one is a memory, he whispered, preserved by the garden, a fragment of someone's heart. The stranger glanced up, their eyes reflecting the soft light that shimmered across the water. "Can they be seen?" they asked, voice soft with wonder. Thaddeus nodded, his gaze never leaving the fountain. "If the garden wishes it, yes." He stepped closer, his fingertips brushing the petals of a lily that drifted just within reach. The water rippled gently, and for a fleeting moment, the surface shimmered with images, soft and blurred, like shadows caught in mist. The stranger leaned forward, eyes wide with awe. Shapes moved within the water's surface, figures walking beneath willow trees, hands clasped, their laughter carried off by the wind. A child running through fields of wild lavender, their hair catching the light of dusk. The images flickered and faded, leaving only the gentle ripples of water behind. Thaddeus withdrew his hand, and the surface stilled once more. "The garden keeps its memories safe," he murmured. "Even those long forgotten." The stranger remained silent, their gaze fixed upon the water as if searching for something unspoken. Finally, they looked up, eyes bright with curiosity. "And if one wished to leave their own memory?" they asked. Thaddeus smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Then the garden would remember," he replied, his voice as soft as the breeze that stirred the lilies. They lingered by the fountain, the soft trickling of water weaving into the silence like a whispered lullaby. Thaddeus watched the stranger trace circles along the surface of the water, their eyes distant and thoughtful. After a long pause, they looked up. "How long have you been here?" the stranger asked, their voice as soft as the twilight air. Thaddeus smiled, lines creasing at the corners of his eyes. "Long enough to forget the days," he replied. His gaze drifted to the garden paths, where ivy and blossoms intertwined in perfect harmony. "Time moves differently here, slower, I think. Or perhaps it simply pauses." He knelt by the edge of the fountain, his fingers brushing the cool surface. "I found this place by accident," he continued, his voice distant. "Or maybe, it found me." The stranger's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "And you stayed?" they asked, leaning in. Thaddeus chuckled, the sound soft and rich. "I did. The garden has a way of holding on to things, memories, whispers, people." His gaze turned back to the stranger, and for a moment, his eyes seemed far away. "I became its keeper. Its listener." The stranger looked around, their eyes sweeping over the flowers that swayed gently, the ivy that curled along ancient stone. "Do you never leave?" they asked, their voice threaded with wonder. Thaddeus shook his head slowly. "I have no need to," he replied. "The garden is everything I could wish for, and more." He paused, his gaze softening. "But it does not always open its paths. You are rare." The stranger held his gaze, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "I must have been meant to find it, then," they murmured. Thaddeus nodded, his smile gentle and kind. "Perhaps the garden whispered to you," he replied. "It sometimes does that, when it is ready to be found." They wandered deeper into the garden, their footsteps soft upon the cobbled paths that glimmered with dew. The light of perpetual dusk filtered through the branches, casting long shadows that swayed gently with the breeze. Thaddeus led the way, his steps measured and unhurried, as if the paths themselves were guiding him. The stranger followed closely, their gaze sweeping over the lush greenery and tangled vines that curled around stone pillars and archways. "Are there places you have not seen?" they asked, eyes tracing the ivy that wove like lace across the walls. Thaddeus paused, his eyes brightening with a spark of mystery. "There is always something new," he said softly. "The garden shifts, it remembers, it changes. Paths open and close as they wish." The stranger tilted their head, curiosity sparking in their eyes. "Can it hide things?" they asked, voice barely above a whisper. Thaddeus smiled knowingly. "Oh, yes. There are places even I have only seen once. And then never again." He reached out, brushing aside a curtain of ivy with a gentle hand. Behind it lay a doorway, small, arched, and carved from stone, its surface etched with spirals that shimmered faintly. The stranger stepped closer, eyes wide. "Was this always here?" they asked, fingertips grazing the cool surface of the stone. Thaddeus nodded, his voice hushed. "It was waiting," he replied. "The garden shows what it wishes, when it wishes." He stepped back, gesturing with an open hand. "Would you like to see where it leads?" The stranger hesitated, their hand resting on the smooth stone. Then, with a slow nod, they pressed gently, and the door swung open with the softest sigh, revealing a path draped in mist and moonlight. "After you," Thaddeus murmured, his smile gentle and reassuring. The strangers stepped through the doorway, their breath catching as they entered a path draped in silvery mist. Tendrils of fog curled around their ankles, swirling with each step as if stirred by invisible hands. Thaddeus followed, the stone door closing behind them with the whisper of ivy brushing stone. The air was cool and crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender and rain. Lantern vines grew along the edges of the path, their blossoms casting a pale glow that flickered like candlelight. The mist thickened as they walked, muffling their footsteps and softening the edges of the world around them. "Where does this lead?" the stranger asked, their voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the stillness. Thaddeus smiled, his eyes glimmering with quiet mystery. "Somewhere that remembers," he replied simply, his hands clasped behind his back. The stranger glanced over, their brow creasing with curiosity. "Remembers what?" "Dreams, mostly," Thaddeus said softly. "Moments that were never fully lost, just tucked away, waiting for the right eyes to find them." His gaze drifted to the path ahead, where the mist parted slowly, revealing glimpses of statues half hidden beneath ivy, their faces serene and unchanging. "The garden holds on to what matters," he added. "Even if those who dreamed it have long since passed." The stranger's gaze lingered on the statues, their expressions gentle, as if frozen mid-thought. Petals drifted down from unseen branches, settling silently at their feet. "Is it a memory?" the stranger asked, voice hushed with wonder. Thaddeus paused, considering. "In a way," he replied gently. "A whisper of something once cherished, never truly forgotten." He stepped forward, brushing aside a curtain of ivy to reveal a wooden bench, weathered with age but sturdy still. He gestured for the stranger to sit. "Sometimes, it is best to simply listen," he said quietly. "The garden has much to say." The stranger sat upon the bench, the wood creaking softly beneath them. Thaddeus settled beside them, his hands resting upon his knees, gaze turned toward the mist that hung like a veil between the branches. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching long and soft, as if the world itself had paused to listen. A breeze stirred, gentle and cool, carrying with it the faintest whisper of voices, soft, melodic, threaded with laughter and distant song. The stranger's eyes widened, their breath catching in their throat. "Do you hear that?" they asked, voice barely louder than the sigh of the wind. Thaddeus nodded, his expression serene. "I do," he replied. The echoes. The whispers grew clearer, threading through the mist like strands of silk. Shadows flickered at the edge of sight, figures moving gracefully through the fog, their footsteps soundless, their laughter like distant chimes. The stranger leaned forward, eyes fixed on the shifting forms. "Who are they?" they asked, voice full of wonder. Thaddeus smiled softly. "Those who walked these paths before us," he murmured. "The garden remembers them, their joy, their dreams. It holds on, long after the world forgets." The stranger watched as the shadows swayed and shimmered, their outlines faint but unmistakably human. A woman in a flowing dress twirled beneath the branches of an unseen tree, her hair catching the light of the lantern vines. A child chased petals that danced upon the breeze, their laughter threading through the air like birdsong. And then, as swiftly as they had appeared, the figures faded back into the mist, their whispers lingering only for a heartbeat before silence settled once more. The stranger leaned back, eyes shining with wonder. "I have never seen anything like this," they breathed. Thaddeus nodded, his gaze still fixed upon the mist. "The garden holds more than memories," he whispered. "It holds the echoes of all who have loved it." The mist hung thick around them, drifting lazily through the branches and casting soft halos around the lantern vines. The stranger sat in silence, their gaze lingering on the path where the shadows had danced just moments before. Thaddeus watched them with a knowing smile, his hands resting calmly upon his knees. "Not many are allowed to see the echoes," he said softly, his voice threaded with reverence. The stranger turned to him, eyes bright with wonder. "Why me?" they asked, their voice just above a whisper. Thaddeus's smile deepened, his gaze thoughtful. "The garden chooses who it remembers," he replied. "It is selective." He paused, brushing a stray petal from the bench beside him. "Perhaps it saw something in you, a memory that matches its own." The stranger looked away, their hands folded gently in their lap. For a moment, the garden was silent, save for the soft rustling of leaves and the whisper of ivy brushing against stone. "If I were to leave," the stranger began, their voice hesitant, "would it remember me, too?" Thaddeus's expression softened, his eyes glimmering with kindness. "Oh, yes," he said gently. "The garden remembers everyone who walks its paths. Your whispers would join the others, your dreams would drift among the branches, just like theirs." He gestured to the mist, where faint echoes still lingered, soft as distant stars. The stranger's gaze followed his hand, their eyes misting with something unspoken. "And you?" they asked, their voice barely above the breath of the wind. Thaddeus smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I am part of it now," he replied softly. "I am its keeper, its listener. As long as I am here, the whispers will remain." The stranger nodded, a quiet understanding settling over them. For a long while, neither spoke. The mist swirled gently around them, and the garden breathed with the sigh of ancient memories. Time drifted softly in the garden, unhurried and delicate, like petals floating upon a still pond. Thaddeus and the stranger walked side by side, their footsteps hushed upon the moss-covered stones. The light of twilight stretched long and golden, casting shimmering patterns across the leaves. "I feel it," the stranger whispered, their gaze tracing the shadows that swayed gently with the breeze. "The garden, it's alive." Thaddeus nodded, his smile serene. "It breathes with the whispers of those it remembers," he replied. "The branches sway with their laughter, the vines curl with their dreams." His hand brushed along the ivy, and it responded with a soft rustle, as if greeting an old friend. They wandered deeper, following a path that wound through groves of lilac and magnolia, where the scent of blossoms filled the air with a sweetness that lingered on the tongue. Thaddeus paused beneath a willow, its branches heavy with clusters of glowing flowers. He turned to the stranger, his gaze gentle. "Would you like to leave your whisper here?" he asked. The stranger's eyes widened, surprise mingling with quiet reverence. "I can?" they asked, voice soft with wonder. Thaddeus nodded, his hands folded calmly before him. "If you wish," he said simply. "The garden will remember." The stranger stepped forward, their fingers brushing the petals of the willow's blossoms. They closed their eyes, breathing in deeply, and exhaled with the softness of a sigh. For a moment, the branches shimmered with light, swaying as if touched by invisible hands. Thaddeus watched quietly, his eyes bright with understanding. When the light faded, the stranger opened their eyes, their hands still resting upon the branch. "It is done," Thaddeus murmured, his voice as soft as the twilight breeze. "Now, the garden will remember you, always." Step into an orchard where lanterns glow with whispered memories and silver leaves never fade. Follow Maeve as she guides a stranger through paths where the orchard remembers. At the edge of a quiet village, where cobbled paths faded into rolling hills, there lay an orchard that glowed softly beneath the moonlight. Its trees stretched tall and graceful, their branches heavy with fruit that shimmered like droplets of silver. No matter the season, the orchard remained untouched by time, its blossoms never withered, and its leaves never faded. Villagers spoke of the orchard in hushed tones, whispering of its enchantment and the reclusive woman who tended it. Her name was Maeve, and she moved through the orchard like a shadow, her silver hair catching the light as she walked. At twilight, she would light the lanterns that hung from the branches, delicate spheres of glass that flickered with a soft, unearthly glow. The light spilled across the path, casting long shadows that danced with the sway of the wind. Petals drifted gently from the branches, catching the light as they fell, as if frozen in a moment of grace. Maeve tended to the trees with care, her hands gentle as she brushed dust from their trunks and whispered soft words that the wind carried away. She walked the rows with the familiarity of someone who had known them for lifetimes, pausing often to run her fingers over the fruit that hung low and heavy. It was said that the fruit held memories, glimpses of dreams long forgotten, flickering like tiny stars beneath the surface. Though the villagers spoke of her in whispers, Maeve paid them no mind. Her world was the orchard, the sigh of branches in the wind, the glow of the lanterns, the rustle of petals that fell like whispers. Each evening, she would sit beneath the largest tree, her gaze lifted to the stars, her eyes reflecting the light that danced among the branches. She waited for something, though she did not know what. One night, as the moon hung heavy and full above the orchard, the soft crunch of footsteps broke the stillness. Maeve lifted her head, her gaze settling on the path where lantern light flickered. A shadow moved between the trees, pausing beneath the low-hanging blossoms. Maeve watched in silence, her breath catching as the visitor stepped into the light. The stranger stood beneath the glow of the lanterns, their eyes wide with wonder as they gazed upon the orchard. Moonlight spilled across the branches, catching the silver fruit and casting soft glimmers along the grass. Petals drifted lazily from the boughs, brushing against their shoulders as they moved deeper along the winding path. Maeve watched silently, her eyes sharp and steady, her hands folded neatly before her. The visitor knelt beside one of the trees, their fingertips brushing the cool grass. "It's beautiful," they whispered, their voice barely louder than the sigh of the wind. Maeve stepped forward, her footsteps soft upon the moss-covered stones. "Not many find their way here," she said gently, her voice carrying the weight of distant memory. The stranger looked up, startled, but Maeve's gaze was kind, her expression patient. "I didn't know it existed," they replied, their hands brushing petals from their palms. Maeve smiled faintly, her silver hair catching the lantern light. "Few do," she murmured. "The orchard reveals itself only when it wishes to be found." A breeze stirred the branches, sending a flurry of blossoms drifting through the air. They settled upon the path like scattered stars, glowing softly beneath the moon's watchful gaze. Maeve gestured for the stranger to follow, her hand light upon the air. "Come," she said, her voice like a whisper on the wind. "There is much to see." The stranger hesitated, glancing back toward the village that lay distant and dark. But curiosity bloomed in their gaze, and they stepped forward, their footsteps light upon the mossy ground. Maeve nodded approvingly, her smile lingering. "The orchard remembers those who walk its paths," she murmured. "And now, it will remember you." Maeve led the way, her footsteps soft upon the winding path that curled between rows of silver-lit trees. Lanterns hung from the branches, casting delicate pools of light that flickered gently with the breeze. The stranger followed closely, their gaze drifting from the glowing fruit to the blossoms that swayed with each breath of wind. The air was fragrant, sweet and heavy with the scent of blooming petals. "How long has this place been here?" the stranger asked, their voice hushed with wonder. Maeve smiled softly, her eyes never leaving the path. "Longer than I can remember," she replied. "And I have been here a very long time." Her hand reached out, brushing the petals from a low-hanging branch. The orchard grows with the light of the moon, she murmured. It breathes with the stars. The stranger paused, fingertips grazing the trunk of a nearby tree. Its bark was smooth, almost like polished stone, and it pulsed gently beneath their touch, as if alive with a heartbeat of its own. They glanced back at Maeve, curiosity flickering in their gaze. It feels alive, they whispered. Maeve nodded, her expression serene. It is, she replied simply. The orchard listens. It remembers. She gestured to the fruit that hung in clusters, each one shimmering faintly in the lantern light. They hold whispers, she continued. Memories of those who have wandered these paths, echoes of dreams and fragments of stories. The stranger's eyes widened with wonder. Can they be seen? They asked, voice soft with awe. Maeve paused, her hand resting upon the trunk of an ancient tree. If you are gentle, she said quietly, the orchard may show you. Her gaze lingered on the stranger, eyes softening. Would you like to see? The stranger nodded, breath held in anticipation. Maeve's hand swept gracefully through the air, petals swirling around her fingertips. Then follow me, she said, her voice like the hush of leaves in the wind. The path stretched onward, dappled with light, beckoning them forward. They walked deeper into the orchard, the lanterns swaying gently above them, casting shadows that danced upon the grass. The stranger's footsteps were light, careful, as if afraid to disturb the stillness that lingered in the air. Maeve moved gracefully ahead, her hands trailing along the branches, brushing petals that glowed faintly under her touch. This way, she murmured, her voice soft as the whisper of leaves. The path curved sharply, opening into a clearing where the trees arched together, their branches woven like delicate lace. Light spilled through the leaves, dappling the grass with flecks of silver. In the center of the clearing stood a stone pedestal, smooth and untouched by time. Upon it rested a single fruit, shimmering with light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Maeve stepped forward, her hands folded neatly before her. This is the heart of the orchard, she said quietly. It is where the whispers gather. The stranger stepped closer, their eyes wide with wonder. Whispers? They asked, voice barely above a breath. Maeve nodded, her gaze soft. When the moon is full, the orchard remembers, and it whispers back. The stranger reached out, fingers hovering just above the surface of the fruit. A breeze stirred, carrying with it the faintest sound, soft and melodic, threading through the branches. It was like a sigh, gentle and distant, lingering just beyond understanding. Maeve watched silently, her eyes shimmering with the reflection of lantern light. Can you hear them? She asked, her voice so quiet it barely touched the air. The stranger nodded slowly, their hand falling back to their side. I can, they whispered, eyes shining with wonder. Maeve's smile was gentle, her gaze steady. Then the orchard knows you, she replied. And it will remember. Maeve's hand hovered just above the shimmering fruit that rested upon the stone pedestal. Its surface glimmered softly in the lantern light, pulsing faintly as if breathing in rhythm with the orchard itself. The stranger watched with wide eyes, their gaze never leaving the light that danced beneath the fruit's skin. What is it? They asked, their voice hushed with wonder. Maeve's gaze softened, her fingertips brushing the edge of the pedestal. "It is a memory," she replied gently. "One that the orchard has kept, long after its dreamer has gone." She turned to the stranger, her eyes reflecting the silver light. "When someone walks these paths, their whispers linger. The orchard listens, and sometimes, it chooses to hold on." The stranger leaned closer, breath misting softly in the cool air. "And you can see it?" they asked, voice edged with curiosity. Maeve nodded, her fingers brushing the fruit's smooth surface. "If you are gentle," she whispered, "the memory will show itself." She stepped aside, her gaze meeting the stranger's. "Would you like to see?" Maeve asked, her voice barely above a breath. The stranger hesitated, then nodded, eyes shimmering with anticipation. Maeve's smile was soft and knowing. "Place your hand here," she murmured, guiding their fingertips to the edge of the pedestal. The fruit shimmered beneath their touch, its surface rippling like water disturbed by the wind. Light flickered from within, casting faint patterns across the stone. The stranger gasped softly as the light grew stronger, swirling within the glassy surface. Shadows moved, distant and soft, flickering with the echo of laughter and whispered words. For a heartbeat, the orchard seemed to breathe with it, the leaves rustling in time with the pulsing light. And then, as quickly as it had come, the light faded back into stillness. The fruit shimmered once more, then lay silent. The stranger stepped back, their eyes bright with wonder. Maeve nodded, her gaze warm and steady. "The orchard remembers," she said softly. "And now, so do you." They walked in silence after that, their footsteps soft upon the moss-covered path. The stranger's gaze lingered on the branches that swayed gently with the breeze, blossoms drifting lazily to the ground. "How did you come to be here?" the stranger asked, their voice edged with curiosity. Maeve paused, her gaze drifting to the lanterns that glowed softly above. "I have always been here," she replied, her voice soft and steady. The stranger raised an eyebrow, disbelief flickering in their eyes. "Always?" they asked, glancing around at the endless rows of shimmering trees. Maeve smiled faintly, her hands clasped before her. "For as long as I can remember," she said gently. "The orchard called to me, just as it called to you." The stranger looked away, their hands brushing against the petals that scattered across the path. "But I wasn't looking for it," they murmured. Maeve's smile deepened, her eyes reflecting the soft lantern light. "The orchard finds those it wishes to be found," she replied. "Some come searching, and some simply arrive." The path curved, leading them beneath an archway of ivy, its tendrils woven tightly like the threads of a tapestry. Lanterns hung from the vines, swaying with the rhythm of the wind. Maeve stepped lightly through the arch, her hands trailing along the leaves. "And once you are here," she continued, "the orchard knows you, it remembers." The stranger paused beneath the arch, eyes tracing the patterns of light that spilled across the cobbled stones. "Does it remember everyone?" they asked softly. Maeve turned back, her expression serene. "Yes," she replied, her voice like the hush of leaves in the wind. Everyone who walks these paths leaves a whisper, and the orchard never forgets. The path wound gently through the orchard, leading them to a grove where lanterns hung thick upon the branches. Their glass panes glowed with soft light, casting patterns across the grass like fragments of starlight. The stranger paused, gazing up at the lanterns that swayed with the breeze, their light flickering softly. "Why so many?" they asked, their voice barely above a whisper. Maeve stepped forward, her hand brushing the low-hanging vines. "Each lantern is a memory," she murmured, her voice threaded with reverence. "When someone leaves the orchard, their whispers linger, and sometimes, they find their way here." She gestured to the lanterns, her eyes softening. "The orchard keeps them safe." The stranger's gaze swept across the grove, wonder flickering in their eyes. "Can you hear them?" they asked. Maeve nodded, her smile gentle. "If you listen closely," she whispered, "they will speak." She stepped to one of the lanterns, her fingertips brushing the glass. It flared softly, casting light that shimmered like fireflies caught in a dance. The stranger stepped forward, their breath held, and reached out to touch the lantern. The surface was cool and smooth beneath their fingertips, and for a heartbeat, there was silence, soft and unbroken. But then, faint and melodic, a whisper curled through the air, soft as a sigh. Words, distant and hazy, threaded through the stillness. Laughter, the sound of footsteps upon grass, the rustle of wind through branches, echoes of a moment captured and held. The stranger pulled back, eyes wide with wonder. "It's alive," they whispered. Maeve nodded, her hand still resting upon the glass. "Memories are never truly lost," she murmured. "The orchard gathers them, and lets them sing." They moved deeper into the grove, the lanterns swaying above them, their light flickering with each breath of wind. The path curved gently, leading to a small alcove shaded by the branches of an ancient oak. There, tucked among the leaves, hung a single lantern, larger than the others and etched with patterns of ivy and crescent moons. Its light was softer, almost like the glow of distant stars. The stranger paused, their gaze lingering on the lantern's glass panes. "This one, it's different," they whispered. Maeve stepped forward, her expression softening. "It is mine," she replied, her voice carrying a note of quiet reverence. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the surface. The light flared softly, casting long shadows upon the grass. The stranger watched with wide eyes. "Yours?" they asked, voice edged with wonder. Maeve nodded, her gaze never leaving the lantern. "When I first came to the orchard, I was searching," she murmured. "For what, I do not remember. But the orchard found me, and it chose to hold my whispers." She paused, her hand resting gently upon the glass. "That was long ago, yet the lantern still glows." The stranger stepped closer, eyes fixed on the patterns that swirled along the glass. "And it remembers?" they asked, their voice hushed. Maeve smiled softly, her eyes glimmering with lantern light. "It remembers everything," she replied. "The orchard is a keeper of stories, even mine." They stood in silence, the light flickering gently above them. Petals drifted lazily from the branches, catching the lantern's glow as they fell. "Would you like to see?" Maeve asked, her voice soft and steady. The stranger nodded, their gaze never leaving the lantern. "Yes," they whispered. Maeve's hand pressed gently to the glass, and the light flared, illuminating the grove with whispers of a distant past. Maeve's hand rested upon the lantern, her fingertips brushing the etched glass. The light shimmered beneath her touch, casting ripples of silver across the grass. The stranger watched with held breath as the glow intensified, flickering like the heartbeat of something long forgotten. Maeve closed her eyes, her voice soft as a sigh. "This lantern holds a whisper, a memory of when I first came to the orchard." The stranger stepped closer, their gaze fixed upon the swirling light that danced within the glass. "Can you show me?" they asked, voice barely above a breath. Maeve nodded, her hand steady upon the lantern. "If you are gentle," she whispered, "the memory will reveal itself." She gestured for the stranger to step forward. "Place your hand here, and listen." The stranger's hand settled next to Maeve's, their fingers brushing the cool surface. A soft hum threaded through the air, gentle and melodic, as if the orchard itself were breathing. Light flared within the lantern, spilling through its glass panes and scattering across the grass. Shadows flickered, distant and soft, moving with the rhythm of whispers that curled like smoke upon the breeze. Images blossomed within the glow, an orchard bathed in moonlight, petals drifting through the air like fragments of a dream. A young woman walked the paths, her eyes bright with wonder, her hands brushing the branches as if greeting old friends. Lanterns glowed softly above her, casting long shadows that swayed with the wind. Maeve's voice threaded through the air, soft and distant. "I was searching for something, and the orchard called to me." The stranger's gaze lingered on the image of the young woman, her silver hair catching the light of the lanterns. "You were here, all this time," they whispered. Maeve nodded, her eyes misting with memory. "The orchard chose me," she replied softly. "And I chose to stay." The light within the lantern softened, fading back into a gentle glow. The whisper of petals drifting through the air was the only sound that lingered, as if the orchard itself had paused to listen. Maeve withdrew her hand, her eyes reflecting the silver light. "There are paths within the orchard that only appear when they are ready," she said, her voice smooth as river water. "Would you like to see one?" The stranger nodded, curiosity flickering in their gaze. Maeve smiled faintly, stepping back onto the winding path. The stranger followed closely, their footsteps soft upon the mossy ground. The lanterns above flickered gently, casting long shadows that swayed with the rhythm of the wind. "There is a place I have not visited in many years," Maeve murmured, her voice edged with quiet mystery. "A place that remembers." They walked in silence, weaving between rows of towering oaks and blossoming magnolias. The air grew cooler, threaded with the scent of lavender and ivy. Maeve paused before a thick curtain of vines, her hands brushing aside the leaves. Behind it, hidden from view, lay a stone archway draped with ivy, its surface etched with symbols that shimmered faintly in the light. The stranger stepped forward, eyes wide with wonder. "I didn't know this was here," they whispered. Maeve's smile deepened, her gaze softening. The orchard reveals itself, when it wishes to be found, she replied. She reached out, her fingertips grazing the smooth stone. Would you like to see where it leads? The stranger nodded, breath catching as Maeve pressed her hand to the archway. The stone rippled, shimmering softly, and then parted like mist. Beyond lay a path shrouded in moonlight, its surface glimmering with petals that glowed like tiny stars. Maeve turned, her eyes bright with knowing. Follow me, she whispered, her voice soft as falling leaves. Maeve stepped through the stone archway, her silver hair catching the moonlight as she moved. The stranger followed, breath held as they crossed the threshold. The air grew cooler, thick with the scent of ivy and jasmine, and the path beneath their feet shimmered with petals that glowed like scattered stars. Lantern vines twisted along the branches above, their blossoms flickering with soft light that rippled gently as if caught in a distant breeze. The stranger's gaze swept across the path, wonder glimmering in their eyes. Where does it lead? They asked, voice soft with awe. Maeve's smile was gentle, her steps light upon the moss-covered stones. To where the whispers are strongest, she replied. A place that holds the oldest memories of the orchard. The path wound onward, weaving between towering oaks and clusters of silver birch. Leaves rustled softly overhead, their shadows dancing along the ground like whispered secrets. The stranger moved carefully, eyes lingering on the vines that glowed faintly, their petals drifting through the air like sparks of light. As they walked, the sound of water grew louder, a gentle, melodic trickle that threaded through the stillness. Maeve led them around a final bend, and there, beneath the arch of intertwined branches, lay a shimmering pool. Its surface was impossibly clear, reflecting the stars and branches above with perfect clarity. Lilies floated upon its surface, their petals shimmering with hues of violet and silver. Maeve stepped to the edge of the water, her hand outstretched. This is the mirror of echoes, she whispered. It is where the orchard listens, and remembers. The stranger stepped closer, their breath catching as they gazed into the still water. Shadows flickered beneath the surface, soft and distant, like memories caught between breaths. Can I see them? The stranger asked. Maeve nodded, her smile serene. If you wish to listen, she replied. The stranger knelt beside the water's edge, their fingertips brushing the surface. A ripple spread outward, soft and slow, sending waves of light flickering across the lilies. Maeve stood quietly behind them, her hands folded neatly before her, watching as the stranger leaned closer, eyes wide with wonder. What do I do? They asked, voice barely above a whisper. Maeve's smile was gentle, her eyes shimmering with reflected light. Just listen, she replied, her voice like a breath of wind through branches. The water will show you what it remembers. She knelt beside them, her fingers trailing the surface of the pool. Whispers linger here, dreams and thoughts, even those long forgotten. The stranger watched the ripples settle, the surface stilling once more. For a moment, there was only silence, the soft sigh of wind, the rustling of ivy. But then, the water began to shimmer, light swirling beneath its surface like threads of moonlight. Shadows moved, soft and distant, flickering with the faintest hints of motion. Shapes took form, figures walking beneath blossom-laden branches, laughter threading through the leaves, footsteps soft upon moss-covered paths. The stranger's breath caught, their gaze fixed upon the shimmering reflections. "Their memories?" they asked, voice hushed with awe. Maeve nodded, her eyes never leaving the water. "Yes," she murmured. "The orchard remembers them, every whisper, every step." The images shifted, fading back into soft ripples that lapped gently at the water's edge. Maeve withdrew her hand, her gaze turning back to the stranger. "Now the orchard remembers you, too," she whispered. The stranger looked up, eyes bright with wonder. "Will it hold my memories as well?" they asked. Maeve's smile was soft and knowing. "It already has," she replied. "And it will never forget." Discover a river so still it reflects the sky and whispers secrets to those who listen. Follow Callan as he unravels the mysteries hidden beneath its glassy surface. Far beyond the winding paths of ordinary travelers, there flowed a river so smooth it seemed frozen in time. Villagers called it the River of Glass, for its surface never rippled, even when storms swept through the valley. Its waters were impossibly clear, reflecting the sky with perfect clarity, capturing clouds and stars alike as if painted upon its surface. It wound through fields of lavender and ivy, its banks soft with moss and scattered petals. Few dared to walk its edges, for it was said the river whispered to those who lingered too long. Fishermen claimed to hear distant voices, soft, melodic, threading through the morning mist that curled upon its surface. Some believed the river carried the thoughts of those who wandered its banks, others whispered that it held memories long forgotten, drifting just beneath the glassy calm. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky stretched wide with hues of amber and violet, a traveler came upon the river's edge. His name was Callan, a quiet soul with eyes the color of dusk and hands weathered from long journeys. He paused at the water's edge, breath catching as he gazed upon the stillness that stretched before him. Kneeling by the water, Callan dipped his hand into the surface, expecting the chill of mountain streams, but the river was warm, almost like sunlight trapped beneath the glass. He pulled his hand back, droplets sliding from his fingertips. For just a moment, he thought he saw something flicker in the water's depths, a shadow, distant and soft, like the edge of a dream. But when he blinked, it was gone. The river returned to stillness, its surface smooth and unbroken. Callan lingered, his gaze drifting along the water that wound far into the lavender fields. He knew, deep in his heart, that the river held secrets, whispers meant for those who listened. Callan returned to the river the next evening, his footsteps soft upon the moss-covered banks. The air was heavy with the scent of lavender, and the sky stretched wide and clear above him. He knelt again at the water's edge, brushing dew from the cool grass, and gazed into the glassy surface. It reflected the sky so perfectly that it seemed like he was peering into another world, one untouched by time. The wind stirred gently, sending ripples through the fields of lavender, but the river remained perfectly still. Callan leaned closer, his breath fogging the water's surface. For a moment, there was only silence, the rustle of leaves, the call of distant birds. But then, just at the edge of hearing, a whisper curled through the air. It was faint, threaded with softness, like the sigh of wind through branches. Callan's breath caught, and he leaned in closer, his hand hovering above the water. "Who's there?" he whispered, voice barely louder than a breath. The river shimmered faintly, its surface flickering with hints of light that danced just beneath. He held his breath, but the whisper did not return. The water remained smooth and silent, reflecting only the stars that now pricked through the deepening twilight. He stepped back, eyes wide with wonder. "It spoke," he murmured, though the words felt strange on his tongue. He knew, even as he turned to leave, that he would return. The river had whispered, and he was determined to listen. Callan returned to the river each evening, his footsteps growing more familiar with the mossy path that curled along its banks. The water remained impossibly still, reflecting the lavender fields and the wide sky with perfect clarity. He would kneel at its edge, his fingertips brushing the surface, sending ripples that shimmered like fragments of light. Yet each time he leaned in to listen, the whispers stayed hidden, threading just beyond his reach. Days passed like this, soft and unhurried, until one evening, as twilight deepened to dusk, Callan saw something flicker just beneath the water's surface. He knelt swiftly, eyes fixed upon the glassy calm. At first, it was only shadows, soft and distant, like the edge of a dream. But as he leaned closer, the image grew clearer, figures moving gracefully along a path that wound beside the river, their footsteps light and soundless. Callan watched, breath caught in his chest, as the shadows drifted past, glimpses of faces, soft with laughter, their eyes bright with joy. He reached out instinctively, his fingertips brushing the water's surface, but the image rippled and vanished, leaving only the reflection of the stars above. He pulled back, heart thrumming in his chest. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice barely louder than the sigh of the wind. The river remained silent, its surface smooth and unbroken. Callan sat back on his heels, eyes still fixed upon the water. He knew, deep in his bones, that what he had seen was no illusion. The figures had been real, like memories caught in the river's reflection. His thoughts lingered on their faces, soft and distant, like the remnants of a forgotten dream. He promised himself he would return, for the river had shown him something, and he intended to understand. The next evening, Callan arrived at the river's edge just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting hues of amber and violet across the water's surface. He carried with him a lantern, its glass panes polished and gleaming. He knelt beside the riverbank, setting the lantern down upon the mossy earth. Its light flickered gently, casting soft glows that danced across the water. For a long while, there was only stillness, the quiet hush of the wind through the lavender fields, the distant call of evening birds. Callan watched the light ripple across the surface, his eyes tracing the patterns it made. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the water's smooth surface. "Are you there?" he whispered, his voice steady but soft. The river responded with silence, its reflection unbroken. Callan sighed, brushing his fingertips along the edge of the water. But as he began to rise, a ripple spread outward from the center of the river, soft and deliberate. Callan froze, eyes wide as the surface flickered with light, soft and silvery, like moonlight caught beneath the water. He knelt quickly, heart fluttering in his chest. Shadows moved just beneath the surface, shapes that drifted and swayed as if caught in the rhythm of a distant song. Callan held his breath, watching as the images sharpened, faces, gentle and familiar, moving in harmony with the current. He reached out, fingertips grazing the water, but the vision faded, leaving only the lantern light shimmering across the glassy surface. Callan's eyes shone with wonder. The river had whispered again, clearer this time, and he knew he would not rest until he understood its secrets. Callan returned to the river night after night, his lantern casting soft light along the mossy banks. He would kneel at its edge, breath held, waiting for the flicker of shadows beneath the water's surface. The whispers came more often now, soft and distant, threading through the stillness like melodies drifting on the wind. He would listen, his eyes tracing the ripples that spread gently across the glassy calm. One evening, as twilight deepened and the first stars blinked into existence, Callan saw it again. A flicker beneath the surface, soft and shimmering, like a memory stirring to life. He knelt quickly, his hands pressed to the cool grass, and leaned closer. The river responded with gentle ripples, spreading outward in delicate patterns. Shadows moved beneath the surface, clearer than before, figures walking along a path, their faces turned toward the water. But this time, there was more. A whisper curled through the air, soft, melodic, just at the edge of hearing. Callan held his breath, his fingertips grazing the surface of the water. "Who are you?" he whispered, voice trembling with anticipation. The surface shimmered, light swirling just beneath, and for the briefest moment, Callan heard it, a voice, gentle and distant, threading through the silence. "Do you remember?" it whispered, the words slipping through the air like the sigh of leaves. Callan's heart pounded in his chest, and he leaned closer, eyes wide with wonder. "Remember what?" he whispered back, his voice barely louder than the wind. But the river grew still, its surface smoothing back into perfect calm. The shadows faded, leaving only the reflection of the moon shimmering softly above. Callan sat back, breathless and trembling. He had heard it, the river had spoken, and he was certain now that it held something beneath its surface, something that remembered. The next evening, Callan arrived with a lantern in one hand and a book in the other. His footsteps were soft upon the mossy banks, and the air smelled of lavender and rain. He knelt at the river's edge, setting the lantern beside him and opening the worn book upon his lap. Its pages were filled with sketches of distant places, notes scribbled in the margins, maps drawn with careful hands. He traced the lines with his fingertips, pausing now and then to glance at the water's glassy surface. "I brought something to remember," Callan murmured, his voice threading through the silence. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the surface of the river. "You asked if I remember, so I brought something I cannot forget." His hand brushed the edge of the water, sending faint ripples across the reflection of the stars. For a moment, the river remained still, its surface smooth and unbroken. But then, a shimmer spread outward, soft and deliberate, casting patterns of light along the banks. Shadows flickered just beneath, drifting like memories caught on the current. Callan watched with wide eyes, his breath held in his chest. The whispers came softly, curling through the air like threads of song. He leaned closer, heart fluttering. "Do you remember?" he whispered, echoing the words he had heard the night before. The river rippled, and shadows moved with purpose, shapes that flickered and faded, distant and dreamlike. A voice threaded through the silence, soft and melodic. "I remember," it whispered, and Callan's heart quickened. The river knew him. Callan returned to the river each evening, his lantern casting soft glows along the water's edge. The whispers grew stronger now, soft threads of melody that curled through the mist drifting along the riverbanks. He would kneel at its edge, his hand grazing the surface as ripples spread gently across the reflection of the sky. One evening, as twilight deepened and the stars began to prick through the dusk, the river shimmered with a light that danced just beneath the surface. Callan leaned closer, his breath fogging the water. Shadows flickered, soft and distant, like memories caught in the sway of the current. He reached out, fingertips grazing the cool surface, and the whispers grew clearer, threading through the silence. "Do you remember?" the voice asked, soft and melodic, rippling through the air. Callan's heart fluttered, his hand still resting upon the water. "I don't know," he whispered back, his voice trembling with wonder. "Tell me." The river shimmered, light spiraling beneath the surface like threads of silver. A name floated to the surface, its letters swirling just beneath the glassy calm. Callan's breath caught in his throat. It was his own name, written in soft light that flickered like distant stars. He leaned back, eyes wide with awe. "How do you know me?" he whispered, voice barely above the hush of the wind. The water stilled, the light fading back into shadows. Callan's reflection returned, gazing back at him with eyes full of questions. He sat back, hands brushing the mossy earth. The whispers faded, threading back into silence, but Callan knew now that the river remembered him. He rose slowly, lantern flickering by his side, his mind turning with thoughts that twisted like branches in the wind. The river had called him by name, and now he would find out why. The next evening, Callan arrived with purpose. His lantern swung gently by his side, casting long shadows that stretched along the riverbank. He knelt by the water's edge, his breath clouding the cool night air, and set the lantern upon the mossy ground. Its light flickered, casting ripples of gold across the river's surface. Callan watched the light dance, his hand resting just above the water. He took a breath, steady and slow. "I know you remember me," he whispered, his voice threading through the mist. "I want to understand." His hand touched the water, sending soft ripples across the surface. For a moment, there was only stillness, the whisper of leaves, the distant call of birds settling for the night. But then, the river shimmered, its surface glowing with soft light that flickered just beneath the glassy calm. Shadows moved, soft and slow, like memories drifting upon the current. Callan leaned closer, his eyes wide with wonder. Shapes formed, fleeting and distant, a lantern, swinging gently from a hand he could not see, footsteps upon mossy ground, laughter threading through the stillness. He watched, breathless, as the images swayed with the water's rhythm. The whispers grew louder, curling through the air like the edge of a forgotten song. "I remember," the voice whispered, soft and melodic. Callan's heart fluttered, his hand brushing the water once more. "Who are you?" he asked, voice barely louder than a breath. But the river grew still, its surface smoothing back into silence. Callan sat back, eyes bright with wonder. He knew, without question, that he would return. Callan returned the next evening, his lantern swaying gently at his side. The moon hung low above the horizon, casting pale light across the river's surface. He knelt by the water's edge, breath curling in soft plumes, and set the lantern upon the mossy ground. Its glow spilled over the water, scattering faint ripples of light that shimmered like starlight. He leaned closer, fingertips grazing the cool surface. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice soft and steady. "I want to understand." His hand lingered upon the water, sending faint ripples that spiraled outward. The river shimmered in response, light flickering beneath its surface, like memories waking from a long sleep. For a moment, there was silence, the soft rustle of wind through lavender, the distant call of night birds. But then, the whispers returned, threading through the stillness. "Will you walk the path?" the voice asked, its tone like the edge of a sigh. Callan's heart fluttered, his hand pressing deeper into the water. "What path?" he asked, breath catching in his throat. The river shimmered, and for the first time, the surface parted. A thin, glowing path stretched beneath the water, smooth and shimmering, winding through the lavender fields like a ribbon of light. Callan stared, eyes wide with wonder. "Is it real?" he whispered, voice trembling with disbelief. The whisper returned, soft and melodic. "If you believe," it replied, threading through the air like distant music. Callan took a deep breath, his hand still resting upon the water's edge. The path glowed softly, its light flickering with each ripple. Callan rose slowly, eyes fixed upon the shimmering trail beneath the surface. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his chest, that he would follow it. Callan stood at the edge of the river, his heart thrumming with quiet anticipation. The path beneath the water shimmered faintly, casting soft light that rippled with each breath of wind. He glanced back at the lantern that flickered beside him, its glow stretching long across the mossy ground. The whisper lingered in his mind, threading through his thoughts like a distant song. He knelt once more, his fingertips grazing the water's surface. It was warm to the touch, like sunlight caught beneath glass. The path shimmered beneath his hand, light spiraling outward in soft waves. Callan took a breath, steady and sure. "I'm ready," he whispered, his voice barely louder than the wind. The river responded with a ripple that spread gently across its surface. Callan pressed his palm flat against the water, and to his astonishment, it held, solid and smooth, like stepping upon stone. He hesitated, heart fluttering in his chest, then took a step forward. The water held beneath his weight, glowing softly with each step he took. The path wound onward, shimmering with light that flickered with each step. Lavender swayed gently on either side, its scent thick in the cool night air. Callan walked carefully, his eyes fixed upon the trail that twisted beneath the river's surface. Whispers curled around him, soft and melodic, threading through the stillness. He paused, turning back toward the riverbank, but it had faded into mist, soft and distant, like the edge of a dream. Callan took a breath, his gaze drifting back to the path that wound through the shimmering water. There was no turning back now. He took another step, and the whispers grew stronger, calling him deeper into the heart of the river. Callan walked the shimmering path, his footsteps light and steady upon the water's surface. The river stretched wide around him, its banks fading into mist that curled like tendrils of smoke. The lavender swayed gently along the edges, petals drifting lazily through the air as if carried by invisible hands. The whispers grew stronger with each step he took, soft and melodic, threading through the stillness like strands of moonlight. The path glowed beneath his feet, its light rippling with each movement. Callan paused, his breath misting in the cool night air, and gazed down into the depths of the water. Shadows flickered there, soft and distant, shapes that moved gracefully, swaying with the rhythm of the current. He knelt carefully, his hand grazing the surface, and the water rippled beneath his touch. Images shimmered to life, figures dancing along the riverbank, laughter drifting through the branches, hands clasped beneath lantern light. Callan's heart fluttered as he watched, his breath catching in his throat. These were not just shadows, they were memories, echoes of moments long past, preserved beneath the river's glassy calm. "Who are they?" he whispered, his voice barely above the hush of the wind. The river rippled in reply, light spiraling outward. "They are those who walked the path before you," the whisper replied, its voice soft and melodic. "They left their whispers here, just as you are leaving yours." Callan watched the figures sway and shimmer, their movements graceful and unhurried. He leaned closer, his fingertips grazing the water's surface, and for a heartbeat, he thought he saw one of them look back, eyes bright with recognition. He stumbled back, heart pounding, but the shadow only flickered and faded into mist. The path stretched onward, its light beckoning him forward. Callan took a breath, steadying his heart, and stepped back onto the trail of light. He knew, without doubt, that he was being called deeper into the river's secrets. The mist thickened as Callan walked, swirling gently around his feet, softening the edges of the world. The path beneath him glowed with soft light, stretching onward into the haze. The whispers grew louder now, soft and melodic, curling through the stillness with threads of memory. He followed them, his footsteps soundless upon the water's surface. Ahead, the mist parted, revealing a clearing where the water spread wide and still. In its center stood a stone pedestal, ancient and weathered, etched with symbols that glimmered faintly in the lantern light. Callan approached slowly, his breath catching as he gazed upon it. The pedestal shimmered with light that pulsed gently, like the beat of a sleeping heart. He knelt beside it, his hand brushing the stone's cool surface. Whispers threaded through the air, melodic and soft, and the water rippled gently around the pedestal's base. Callan leaned in, his fingertips grazing the symbols etched along its surface. "What is this place?" he whispered, his voice barely louder than a breath. The river responded with a ripple of light, spiraling outward across the surface. "The heart of the river," the whisper replied, its tone gentle and distant. "It is where all memories are kept, where whispers are woven into the water." Callan's eyes widened, his hand resting upon the pedestal. He could feel it thrumming beneath his fingertips, soft, steady, like the rhythm of a distant song. He closed his eyes, breathing in deeply, and for the first time, he heard them clearly, whispers of laughter, footsteps on mossy paths, voices calling names long forgotten. They threaded through his thoughts like silver strands, weaving together in perfect harmony. Callan opened his eyes, heart steady, gaze fixed upon the shimmering pedestal. He knew now that the river held more than just memories, it held echoes of life itself.